Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated will be filming, recording, and photographing this event for use in Delta promotional videos, photography, advertisements, social media platforms, web pages, and other future Delta events as the case may be. Via continued participation in and by continuing to remain logged into this event, hereby acknowledges that participant may be photographed, filmed, or otherwise recorded while on the premises of the event. Grants Delta, its successors, assigns, and licensees irrevocable consent to include participants' name, likeness, photographic image, mannerisms, and voice or other recording in the production or for exploitation for any purpose whatsoever in any and all media now known or hereafter devised throughout the universe in perpetuity without compensation and or credit. Represents, warrants, and agrees that Delta holds and shall forever hold all display, publication, and ownership rights, licenses, and privileges to any and all media, whether in law or in equity, which may be ascertained, registered, or in any way utilized with respect thereto, and waives, releases, and transfer, as the case may be, any and all such rights, whether in law or equity, as may be necessary or required to effectuate Delta's establishment of ownership. Participant further agrees to abide by and comply with any and all terms of use and or additional participation rules as applicable and specified during relevant sections of the program, and acknowledges, understands, and agrees that violation of such participation rules shall result in legal recourse and disciplinary action.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janelle Brevard with the Fairfax County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and I would like to turn this over to Helene Fisher, our president.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in exploring one of the most divisive issues impacting the political and educational landscape in our country, and especially here in Virginia, where many of you are joining us from today. I am pleased to welcome the members of the Fairfax County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the other chapters in the area, and our partners in the Fairfax County Chapter of the NAACP. The panel on critical race theory is just the first step for us in combating misinformation about this topic and the role of teaching accurate representation of history in our schools. We are so grateful to our panelists for their time and for sharing their professional experience and wisdom. I hope this panel will be enlightening and it will give you much food for thought and motivation to mobilize. I'd like to introduce Ms. Karen Camblin, the president of the Fairfax County Chapter of the NAACP, to provide additional greetings. Karen?
I thank you, President Fisher. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Karen Camblin, and I'm the current president of the Fairfax County NAACP. And it is with great pleasure that I extend a warm greetings on behalf of the members and leadership team of Fairfax County NAACP. The Fairfax County NAACP branch is the nation's first rural branch, having a humble but targeted beginning as a standalone committee to receive in its first charter in 1918, and its final charter declaring it as the Fairfax County NAACP branch in 1944. We are as committed to advocating for fair and equal rights today for the Black community as they were in the beginning of the branch in 1918 and the start of NAACP itself in 1909. Our mission is to achieve racial equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights and eliminate discrimination. We are guided by NAACP's Game Changers, which are issues known to have significant impact on the socio and economic advancement of the Black community. And as you can imagine, access to quality education is on top of that list. So we're proud and humbled to be here with this very important and relevant and timely discussion. I am joined here today by many members of the branch, as well as our executive committees and chairs of our issue groups, as well as Dr. Sujatha Hampton, who is our third VP and Education Committee Chair, and Ms. Michelle Lee, who is our VP, our first VP, as well as the Freedom Fund Chair, and a member of the Washington, D.C. alumni, and she will continue our greetings to you today. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Leet, the first Vice President of Fairfax County NAACP and a proud 35-year member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I'm especially excited that Fairfax NAACP is partnering with the Fairfax County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta to bring this important and timely education and conversation on critical race theory. We've all heard it defined and redefined hundreds of times over the last couple of years, with one explanation and definition being more ridiculous than the previous. We've all heard CRT being used to dismantle workplace diversity and inclusion programs, and to prevent children from learning about Rosa Parks and Emmett Till, and to ensure youth never read the works of the late Pulitzer Prize winning author, Toni Morrison. And that would be a real shame. So this evening, I very much look forward to learning alongside all of you what CRT is, why it is being misidentified and used as a weapon against education and true history, and more importantly, what we can do to advocate for our children so that they are not swept away in the tide of miseducation. I'll turn it back over to you, President Fisher.
Thank you so much, ladies. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator who will begin this important discussion. Dr. Jamal Walker, he will introduce our esteemed panel. But before he does that, Dr. Walker is the Director of Strategic Communications and Public Relations and Journalism and Media Studies. He's also a professor of strategic communications and public relations at Trinity University. He is also an award-winning journalist, historian, and author. So everyone get ready. And Dr. Watson, did I say Walker? Let's say Watson.
Walker, but it's fine.
Let's say Watson. Dr. Watson.
Thank you
so Watson. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam President Fisher, for your kind introduction and for the invitation to moderate this discussion today. I'm really, really excited to be engaged in a conversation with these brilliant panelists who are joining us today as we delve into this topic of critical race theory. I also want to acknowledge my colleague at Trinity Washington University, Dr. Diane Reese, for her hard work in bringing us all together. So let's give her a virtual applause if we can. Let me introduce our panel, and then we can get right into it. We have Dr. Nicholas Gaffney, who is an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina, upstate. So happy to have him. We have Miss Jill Cook, who is the Executive Director of the American School Counselor Association. We have Dr. Gregory Hutchins, Jr., who is the Superintendent of the Alexandria City Public Schools. We have Mr. Amos Jones, who is a principal of the Amos Jones Law Firm, and who is also a professor of media law at Trinity Washington University. And finally, we have Jalea Lyles Dunn, who is the Director of Learning for Justice. So we are happy to have you all here. I want to invite you all to put your question, if you have one, in the box below, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions before the hour expires. So I want to start off with you, Dr. Gaffney, and then move to Professor Jones if we can. And that is to ask you, what is critical race theory? Can you clarify what it is and what it isn't, and why is it so important, particularly in this moment in time?
Sure. I mean, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you all tonight and to have this extraordinarily important conversation. And I love the question, Dr. Watson, because for me, it's one of the most ironic things about this debate over critical race theory is that it's so highly complex and nuanced that you really don't see it as a part of K through 12 education. To give to try to give a short definition for something so sophisticated and complex, critical race theory is a methodology that helps us understand the way race operates in structures that are designed to be race blind. Critical race theory has its origins in critical legal studies, in the ways in which attorneys try to understand how race operated within the law. Its origins really began in the aftermath of the civil rights movement, and in particular, the aftermath of the Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And these legislative solutions and judicial rulings were supposed to alleviate racial discrimination, but it seemed like racial discrimination continued to persist in American society. So the goal was to really understand why that was. And that is what really gives birth to critical race theory. So it's really it had its origins in understanding how the legal system within the United States helps to sustain race and racial discrimination. And it's grown kind of beyond that and kind of begin to morph into other fields to understand how race operates, and everything from the educational system to healthcare to US labor markets to understanding American culture and the arts.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Professor Jones, you want to pick up?
Yes, just to indicate that part of the intellectual history of critical race theory is its origins within critical theory in general. And in critical theory in general, which has spawned things like Black liberation theology and queer studies and things like that, the meta-narrative is one of power and oppression. And the idea is to understand the way institutions, people, and organizations work with regard to how power operates for those who have it and those who don't. And that's why in law, it's such an important tool. Now, I have volunteered a photograph from 7 years ago when Dr. Watson hosted a panel in New York City at Reverend Al Sharpton's convention, National Action Network, where Kimberly Crenshaw, the high godmother of the critical race theory at Harvard Law School, was on panel. And Dr. Gaffney's exactly right. This is an approach that's been utilized in the higher academy for years. Now, I will say that it does make its way into the thinking, like any meta-narrative or any worldview, which is what it can become. It's just really a hermeneutic, it's a heuristic, might even be an epistemology, a theory, but it can reveal itself whenever you have people who want to teach about the way people are differentiated, whether it's fair or not, and whether that's built into some process. So even though critical race theory might not be taught, certainly one would expect that educators who have master's degrees might be a bit informed by that particular approach, just like Marxism, or in fact, critical theory in general has been called cultural Marxism because of its need to level things. And if we're honest, all such theories have utility, usefulness, and are not the harsh threat that adversaries see. There's room. I am not a critical race theorist, for example. In my racial study, I'm a civil rights attorney. Some people think I'm very radical in the way I do my work and my scholarship, but I'm expressly not critical race theorist myself, as much as I embrace many of the aims and approaches and validate the theory as good and a force for good. I'm just straight legal realism. I'm in a different school of methods. And that's because I happen to believe that just a different approach. I think my approach is more constructive and more enduring. We'll talk about that another time. But the fact is that it's no one's teaching this to elementary school students, but educated people might be informed by it as a tool, as they are in any meta-narrative, including Christianity or Judaism or religions. So it's not the threat that people in the boogeyman that folks have made it out to be. This is from someone who doesn't even consider himself part of that school of thought.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Dr. Hutchins, I'm going to bring you in if I can, so you can kind of define it from where you sit at your perch as the superintendent.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say that we don't even talk about CRT in public education. And this is why it's funny when I get questions about it. I always tell people that the same time you heard the word CRT used publicly when it was being politicized by our former president, and then when all of our politicians began to use it as what I think to discredit public education, we started getting questions about it as superintendents. And you won't find anything in regards to CRT in any of our documents or policies or curriculum, because as the professor said earlier, this is something that is more at the college level and law school level. When we say things like CRT from the education perspective, and let me just tell you what our acronym stands for prior to critical race theory. It stands for culturally relevant teaching, right? That is a term that educators would know, which is not CRT, not the critical race theory. I guess it's two different things, right? And I think that there was just, to me, I believe there was some disconnect that was happening that really just got out of control. And if we don't begin to educate folks, specifically in the pre-K through 12 sector, we're going to keep having this battle for nothing.
Yeah, Ms. Cook, I see you shaking your head. I'm going to bring you in if I could.
Well, I am shaking my head because I agree completely with what Dr. Hutchins was saying. I mean, it is not something taught nor is part of public education. What's happened, though, is that CRT has been incorrectly linked in some places with social and emotional learning. Social and emotional learning is definitely something that's part of public education. We have wanted since the beginning of public education our students to experience social and emotional learning so they can leave the public school system to be contributing members of society. So one of my concerns as I work with school counselors across the country every day is the fact that SEL has been weaponized at a time when we know we need it now more than ever. Students are coming back to us with the trauma of the pandemic, with traumas of grief and loss. And we know mental health concerns are on the rise. And we're even before the pandemic. And if we take SEL out of the equation, we are not going to be able to provide our students many of the supports they need and give our teachers tools they need to work with their kiddos every day.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ms. Dunn. I want to bring you in if we can. I guess I'm wondering, given the fact that there is a disconnect between what is actually happening versus the narrative that we see on TV or hear about, why the timing now? Why is this critical race theory kind of debate even something that we're talking about now?
Thank you. I agree with all my panelists as well. I want to say now for me, this is a time there's a threat. There's a threat on white America. There's a threat for white supremacy. A multinational, multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy is a threat to white supremacy. As such, white supremacy is a threat to a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. So we're talking about democracy right now. We're talking about inclusion. We're talking about equity. We're talking about everyone around the table. And it's so, I mean, 2020, the uprisings, there were no more individual justice calls. There was systemic racism calls. There were questions of systemic racism. There was questions of intersectionality, how all groups would come together. And it scared white America. And there was a complete backlash, and white backlash is real, to what is happening for our children, what would happen in our classrooms. And let's be very real that in 2020, the majority of the children's population were children of color. So let's think about who's sitting in our classrooms right now, who are in public schools, and children of color are concentrated in public schools. So whether you control the next generation of new leaders, the next voices, those who will kind of shape this country to what it should be and uphold the promise of democracy, you get them in the schools. And this is not new. James Baldwin talked about it in speeches to educators years ago in the 1920s. This is still, we are now meeting the immediate backlash of great resistance to when we try to build a democracy that we should be living up to. So I want to say that this kind of CRT is just a dog whistle. This is a dog whistle for power. It's a dog whistle of control. It's a reminder of what is at stake for white America.
Yeah, Dr. Gaffney, you're a historian, and so the timing of this is not a coincidence, right?
No, not at all. I just love to echo what Ms. Dunn has just shared. And I think I'm not a critical race theorist, as Professor Jones kind of shared. I mean, I'm an empiricist as well from a historical standpoint, but a critical race theorist would draw on history to make some informed understandings about what's happening within the American political system. And it's not just about kind of white anxiety, right? There's a very real loss of political power of the white majority that we're living in right now. If you look at the last 4 presidential election cycles that have taken us across the last 16 years, you've seen an electoral outcome in which the majority of white voters, with the exception of 2016, lost the election. And what you had was a coalition of minority voters and in coalition with a white minority carrying the day, right? If you look at the election of Obama in 2008, 2012, the white majority carried President Trump to victory in 2016, but then you had a restoration of minority coalition with the minority of white voters, essentially defeating the white majority with the election of President Biden. So it's not just an anxiety, it's really tied to a very empirical understanding of the way in which political power operates and where it rests within the United States. And so in many ways, this is a dog whistle in a very real sense. When you hear the debate over critical race theory being deployed, it's in the political landscape and it's being used by candidates to galvanize a political support base. So there is a direct kind of correspondence to why this debate is taking place in this particular moment in time, tied to where political power lies within the country, I think.
So Professor Jones, did you want to hop in there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to point out though that we want to, it's interesting because the discussion itself is informed by the perspectives and approaches and theoretical underpinnings of what we're talking about, which is great. That's as it should be. One of the perceived dangers of critical race theory, however you think it's deployed or not in grade school on up through university, is that a central component of it is one's identity and where one falls in the oppressor oppressed scheme in various circumstances. The idea of intersectionality based on your identity has been a very helpful way of understanding, well, an Asian woman may experience this phenomenon this way by virtue of her assumed cultural identity or whatever. In fact, the whole of affirmative action for diversity purposes kind of assumes that there will be a group identity, that if Black students are here, there's going to be a kind of perspective that might be more common than not to that group. That's enriching. So there's an acknowledgement. I always joke that even if the Republican National Committee in their platform is not about diversity per se, or even affirmative action, they'll never throw a convention without minority keynote speakers now, because they've embraced, if not theoretically, in realism, that this is probably a good thing. And that's the warning I want to just point out here. We have to be a bit careful, because even as we have this alleged fear of white America becoming afraid, you still have minority people who are not on board with a lot of this. Donald Trump doubled his percentage of the Black female vote from 2016 to 2020, from 4% to 8%. And that was after Charlottesville. That was after Kamala Harris, the AKA, sorry Deltas, was on the ticket. And so what happened? Well, that doesn't mean they all are just Uncle Toms and confused. There's a view among a lot of minority people who see themselves as oppressed that a particular narrative can lead to unhealthy identity politics. And I don't agree with that, I should say, but there is a real philosophy. And that's why white Republicans voted for Senator Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, the Indian governor, Bobby Jindal. It's funny that the minorities tend to come up now in Republican spaces. And I have to believe that these minority Republicans have a different view. So I want to be careful that we don't automatically assume the very theory of critical race theory to act as though there's a fear of a browning of America. That's why this critical race theory critique came up. Critical race theory was really being critiqued indirectly in the 90s when we had the affirmative action wars on college campus and Leonard Jeffries and all of that controversy at City University of New York. It's not that new that this bubbling up of, I'll just say conservative, for lack of a better word, conservative traditionalism in thought and protecting people's turf has been around. So I want to push back just a little bit on the assumption that it's all about Black and brown babies are taking over America, especially when you consider that nearly all the economic clout is more firmly in white hands than it's ever been in our country, including slavery economically as a matter of empirical. So white people don't have anything to fear at all. We'll still be doing the step and fetch it of Uber Eats. And you look out your window in Washington and you see who's in the slave economy and delivering the food and driving people around and making no money with no benefits. Whites have nothing to worry about on that score, in my opinion.
I want to get to Dr. Hutchins if I can, because, you know, given that it is not a K through 12 issue largely, I'm wondering about the calls that you must receive or other superintendents around the country from parents who understandably are confused, right? Because they are watching the news. They think that Black history will be taken out of the curriculum. How I guess I'm wondering, how are you explaining, what is the narrative that you're providing to parents, and what advice do you give to other educators on how to help them understand what is going on?
Yeah, so I get a number of calls. I don't really get that call that often, but I see that, or I hear about it because I got off of Twitter. But somebody reads my Twitter for me to tell me because it's too crazy. I got to start reading that stuff. It gets into your brain and it messes you up. But one thing that I constantly say is we are teaching American history, right? I mean, you really can't argue against teaching American history. And we're teaching our true history. And I think it's important not only for our Black and brown children, but also for our white children to know the history of this country, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, I constantly tell our families that, we have to make sure that when we're teaching any type of curricular material, that it's age appropriate. We can't sit down and have this kind of conversation with first graders right now, right? We may want to talk about American history, but it may be in a different way. So we have to make sure that it's age appropriate, but that we're speaking truth. And one thing that I've learned, I know my wife and I, we try to be honest with our kids. That's why I hated talking about the Easter Bunny and all that kind of stuff, right? Because we're trying to tell the truth. That you really have to make sure that you're teaching your kids at a young age, facts, because if you don't, later in life, it causes confusion. And then they begin to second guess anything that people say, right? So we need to make sure that, in our history books, which now history books are being vetted, right? We're making sure, even in our school division, when we're adopting a book, we have a full process to ensure that the right kind of history is being told, that it is making sure that, it's being told in an appropriate way, that there's representation in these books as well, so that there's not just 4 pages on Black people. When Black people help make America, right? We have to have those serious conversations. So I guess to answer your question, Dr. Watson, we say that we are teaching American history, and we do have curricular standards that we follow. One other thing I just want to add is that I'm really excited about the fact that now museums and different places like George Washington, the Mount Vernon, his home that's here in Alexandria, as well as Thomas Jefferson's home. Now that there's been so much pressure on speaking truth, you now hear some of the real stories when you're visiting, these monuments, as well as, historical homes. And I think that is another way for students to see that, slavery wasn't everybody sitting around having fun and having a good old time, right? Clapping and dancing. I mean, so that's a part of African culture and African-American culture. However, we were whipped and beaten and picking cotton, and our kids were being taken from us. Our wives were being raped. Our husbands were being put and released and killed and murdered. These are real facts that we need to discuss. And I think that the more we can speak truth into these young folks, they can understand some of the issues that we're seeing across America today.
No, very, very good points. Thank you so much. I mean, one of the things that is also disturbing is the number of books that are beginning to get banned in states across. I'm going to go to Ms. Dunn and Ms. Cope. Maybe you can comment on that, the kind of linkage and correlation between this discussion around critical race theory and what we're seeing played out in terms of the banning of curriculum and books is quite concerning, isn't it, Ms. Dunn?
Absolutely. Many of our students are feeling like they don't belong in those classrooms. They are faced with disciplinary actions that they don't understand why. And when you cut them out of the conversation, you cut them out of the space, then you make that there's no value. You bring in race trauma incidents to school when you show up as yourself, and it's vulnerable if you want to show and be nurtured in a space that is a learning environment for you to process and understand the environment that you've been faced with. There's no voice for that. There's no space when we cut out, as Ms. Cook shared, social and emotional learning. We cut out diversity conversations, and we cut out your story and my story should be shared together. We cut out those inclusion and those types of justice conversation that needs to happen in those classrooms. And so banning books are a great way to bring new narrative and to share narrative and conversation. Curriculum itself, we with the Southern Poverty Law Center, Learning for Justice has a framework how teachers can teach developmentally age appropriately what hard history looks like and what these conversations have in these conversations and dialogues. So these are important. These aren't just things we do just because they sound good and look good. We want to make one set of children feel bad, another feel good. It's for all children to see themselves through mirrors and through windows. You see other children's stories, but you also see yourself in it. We can't have one group seeing themselves and another group not see themselves. So this curriculum, the books, the pedagogy, the approach to talking and inclusion is so important and it's so needed. And right now in our nation, more than anything, it cannot be taken away, it can't be questioned, it can't be removed, and it can't be used and weaponized for political agendas.
Thank you so much. And I want to get to Ms. Cook, but I also want to remind you, if you have a question, definitely put your question in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before the hour is over. Ms. Cook.
Oh, I agree with everything that was just said. Books for young people are exactly that. They are mirrors to see themselves reflected in literature, reflected in stories, and they are windows into learning about others. And all educators and school counselors use books in their everyday work with students. So to have identified a specific group, a specific issue that some don't want in the school library anymore is concerning. I read an article that was a little concerning that talked about book banning in public schools that said that only about 4% of the books that had been banned were the result of parental concerns, and that a large majority came from the schools or the school administrators themselves. Likely, I don't know this, I'm speculating, out of not wanting to have to deal with the issues that come from parents. We know there are school board meetings across the country where parents show up to every single solitary board meeting reading passages from books that they personally find offensive. And we know those books are often for students of color, LGBTQ youth, often marginalized youth whose stories in libraries are potentially being eradicated when others issues or stories that might be as offensive to others are left. So I think all educators need to look at their libraries, do an audit of the books in their library to ensure that they have opportunities there for all their students.
Yeah, I want to stay with that or actually link to something that's connected to that, but a point that you mentioned earlier, and that was social emotional learning, because, you know, one of the things that has happened in this debate is that mental health supports like social emotional learning have erroneously been linked to critical race theory by opponents. And I was wondering, what is the impact on students as you see it?
Well, then we don't have supports in place for students who need it most. As I said, you know, students have come back to schools from the pandemic with needs, with trauma, and school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, these individuals in schools who do this work and often lead social and emotional learning, which is not just a school counselor thing. It's a school-wide approach. It has to be institutionalized in how we approach it. And again, it's not something new in the last year. It's something that's been around, but the result is that students are not understanding perhaps what's going on with them. We are not able to connect parents and families to outside supports who might need more intensive mental health supports. And we know there's studies that show that students of color, in terms of their mental health, were more impacted than others during the pandemic. We know that students of color went to the emergency room for mental health concerns during the pandemic at a higher rate than white students. So knowing that we have these students coming to us and that helping them build protective factors through social and emotional curriculum, helping them to identify issues and name things, and knowing who they can talk to in their school, at their house, outside of home to get the help they need could potentially be very damaging. And I worry about the long-term impacts if we say, I'm sorry, we can't help children with their social and emotional needs anymore, because we know research says students can't learn if those are not addressed.
Yeah, no, that's really important. Thank you so much. I want to switch gears if I can to talking about higher education, and we've seen the attacks on academic freedom, and we've seen that taking place in states across the country. I want to go to Dr. Gaffney and ask you, are you concerned for faculty members, particularly junior faculty members who engage in critical race theory, whose scholarship and research is embedded in critical race theory, that they may be targets of, again, state legislators around the country?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I just kind of think back to last summer as the controversy over Nicole Hannah-Jones' appointment to UNC Chapel Hill's School of Journalism played out in the public. In the way in which alumni, donors, and state legislatures within the state intervened in that episode. It definitely has faculty members on my campus, other campuses concerned who actually do CRT, critical race theory, as a part of their research, as a part of their kind of upper level undergraduate and graduate level classes. There's, I mean, the legislative landscape right now in South Carolina. There is a critical race theory instructional prohibition bill sitting in our House Education Committee. So there is a large concern about the possibility of legislative interference, kind of reaching into higher education. And a lot of colleagues that I have are kind of delicately kind of framing what it is they do and how they describe it, with concern about the possibility of encouraging state legislators to pull this out of committee and bring it to the floor for a vote. So it is a very delicate landscape that especially junior faculty members who have to go up for tenure, that'll have to get approved by authorities higher than our kind of university system, are very nervous about.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, Professor Jones and Ms. Dunn, and we can work our way around.
Well, and I'm sure they're nervous. And this is one where a dose of realism is helpful, as it always is. And by the way, I appreciate the charitable manner in which everybody is regarding this. Realism makes us say, you know, even if I hate this theory on one side or the other, what good has come out of it that we can affirm? And I think back to, I grew up in a relatively conservative Western Kentucky community. There were unions and stuff, but it was culturally conservative. And it was like most places in the early mid 80s, there were, for just one example, there was just no gay rights. You know, the gay rights movement came along, ACT UP came along. It was shocking to people what they were doing, stopping traffic and stuff. But when you look now at the civilized discourse and respect that people accord to LGBTQIA people, the most ardent reactionary must agree that that's a better way to interrelate in a community, in a city, than what was going on before when you played Smear the Queer in gym class. That was the thing, dodgeball, and that's just not done. So we have to look and say, even if I don't like critical race theory, where would we be without an approach like that in dealing with, just for example, sentencing disparities? We would not know about mass incarceration without an interrogation of seemingly neutral courts, even down to what they choose to publish in the opinions in the US reports, which is what lawyers use to argue cases. That's fraught with bias. That's just the truth. So, but I do want to be careful. Part of the reason we're seeing a pushback especially among state legislatures and state schools against critical race theorists, is that they've enjoyed a free and unquestioned ride. In fact, if you're not in the critical race theory camp, it's almost impossible to get a position when it comes to the social sciences in law and race. And that's a shame, because there's a lot of good thinking going on that's not necessarily in that camp. And I can prove that. Everybody knows that nearly all of the race scholars are operating in critical race theory. So no wonder that you might get a pushback. There's a pass. So there's going to be a check and balance and a reckoning. I'm not saying that it's appropriate for state legislatures to block and trustees to block Nikole Hannah-Jones, but at the same time, the real crisis is that every theory has its limits. And what the Academy needs is a diversity of theories so that we can finally get to some really good solutions and things, particularly in law, where critical race theory has its highest currency. The fact is that we haven't come up with any decent legislation in civil rights that's innovative since Dr. King got shot in the face in 1968. And yet we have all of these critical theorists and liberation theologians and things, and we haven't really come up with a real statute that's as meaningful as anything in the past with all these urgent needs. And that might include reparations, for example. So I have to question, I'm kind of glad, as someone who's interested in actual progress and real intellectual debate and the proper place of the ivory tower, which has to work in an inclusive environment where you have different and competing views. Sometimes I long for the days of the 90s, when at my elite white college, Emory University, we had to fight to justify affirmative action. And it was that fighting to justify it that strengthened affirmative action and probably brought Sandra Day O'Connor to flip in 2003 the way she did to save it. That kind of discourse doesn't happen much anymore, because now it's a formal conclusion. Dr. Todd Gitlin, the 60s head of Students for a Democratic Society, made a comment to the effect about 20 years ago. The elite radical activists who were doing good work in the 60s that I embraced, he said, we lost the suburbs, we lost the courts, we lost the culture wars, but we won the professoriate. And that's been important, but here we have 50 years later a reckoning. And I'm not promoting it, but I'm just saying what goes up must come down. And we need to have the best arguments to save these, along with other things that need to be done to advance education, learning, growth, and community.
Great. I'm going to ask Ms. Dunn if she wants to comment on that. And then I want to get to some, we've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, and I want to get to some of the questions. Ms. Dunn.
I totally enjoyed that comment of the ebbs and flow of social and racial reckoning and justice, because that's what happens. We push, we demand, we get. Power doesn't come without anything. It doesn't come unless we concede and push forward. I think I paraphrased that very wrong. I'm sorry, but you know what I meant when I was going there. But I will say, in education, I mean, in the academia world, young people get anchored to justice and racial justice and social justice work from colleges, in their college campus. That's where you should get it earlier. Don't get me wrong. You should be in the schools, but we know, we did a study in 2018 that showed that high school students knew anything about slavery. Teachers couldn't teach it. Students didn't know anything. So they're not getting it. And we have a lot of work to do in that way, in that space. But when you get to college, that's when you meet new people, new voices. You're challenged, like Dr. Jones just shared. You're challenged, your brain is, your intellect is pushed. You're learning that it's not about you, it's about others. And you just kind of see your world bigger than itself. The argument we're having about this critical race theory is not the same, is not the theory itself, I don't think anymore. It has been umbrellaed by anything that means anybody different, anything about race, anything. It's just put into one big bag of just anything that we don't want to hear you talk about again. That scares me on campuses of learning, of these kind of liberating spaces to learn and walk around. We know how college campuses used to feel and look, green grass, everyone's reading and talking and diverse. It's so diverse and everyone's just kind of pushing and thinking back and forth. If we are stopping that in those campuses, particularly where Dr. Gaffney's sitting, I'm a South Carolinian, by the way, so I just hate that South Carolina is always not my favorite place. It's always the lowest at some of these points. But it scares me that young people won't have that space to grow, to become, to find their righteous space in this world of change and impact. And if we just stop them, cut them off at the knees, we're going to just kind of cut off and have a very obedient, we're trying to have a very obedient and quiet population and demographic that doesn't have a response and have a voice. And so I really love the fact that we have academia, we have these spaces for discourse, but we can't stop it. So it does need to keep going. We keep fighting those spaces. Pre-service teachers come out of those spaces as well. We have to make sure our teachers know what they're entering and how they should be entering and what lens they should be entering this work. We start cutting it off at this school and with the college level, we're going to lose every angle of this. So we cannot lose the voices of our young people. We have to give them the space to keep growing. We have to go back as far as the college campuses, but we can't lose them at the college campus because you're not going to get it anywhere else from this point, unless they are fortunate to join the NAACP or Delta Sigma Theta, other groups that are going to support and nurture your thinking and your growth and intellect. And Alpha Kappa Alpha as well, as I'm a member of.
Well
I had to
said.
throw that one in.
Absolutely,
Beautiful room of
absolutely.
redness. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get into some questions. The first one for Dr. Hutchins. In light of what is happening in the state of Virginia, the governor's executive order about critical race theory, how have you been able to do anti-racist and equity work in your school district in spite of this fact? Also, how did he get buy-in across the district to ensure that the work, how did you, I'm sorry, get buy-in across the district to ensure that the work moves forward?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, when George Floyd was murdered, I made a vow to myself, that was in May of 2020, that I was going to spend the rest of my life dismantling systemic racism in public education. I've written a book. A book is coming out next month. It's called Getting Into Good Trouble. It's a guide to building an anti-racist school system. And it's because we don't have a lot of information out there in regards to how do you build an anti-racist school system? How do you ensure that the appropriate history is taught in classrooms, that you actually know the history of your school system and of your city, because that will give you some answers to why you have challenges and disparities today. It also is going to be important to commit to the racial equity component. I said that our school division in 2020 adopted, in June of 2020, adopted our strategic plan, and our board said racial equity will be the center of our work, or the heart of our work. That is a commitment that we've made. You also have to make sure, like we're doing in Alexandria City Public Schools, is we are dismantling de facto segregation. We're having conversations and taking action in regards to some of the within school education that happens. And that's when you have pull-out services or push-in services, talented and gifted programs, magnet programs, standards to get into an AP class, guidelines to get into an honors class, right? These are all barriers that does not allow students to have, that equal access. And honestly, the equality piece, that's the bare minimum. I mean, that's a given. That's what Brown v. Board of Education 1954 was all about, having equal access. Now it's about meeting students where they are, not necessarily where we want them to be. And that may mean that you have to give some additional supports or less, depending on the student's needs. And then you also have to be strategic thinkers and strategic planners. And in Alexandria, I can honestly say that, we have to navigate these waters in the Commonwealth of Virginia with the new administration. I want to make sure, and I don't know why people are always putting me against the governor, right? And maybe because I write articles and because, I've been in Ed Week, I've been on CNN, things like that. But I really would like to work with our administration. I want to help educate them on the needs of Black and Brown children, because all of these advocacy that's happening right now in regards to dismantling the word diversity or equity or inclusion, that's what this new administration is referring to or talking about. They need to really share some data as to why do you think that? Because I have data to show why we need diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have data to show that there are significant gaps in regards to achievement and opportunity gaps between our Black and Brown students and their white counterparts. And that's across the Commonwealth of Virginia, not just in Alexandria City Public Schools. And then this is my final thing, I promise, but the courageous and being bold is another key component that we're doing, that I'm doing as superintendent. Even being here, I mean, many superintendents, they would have said, no, thank you, if you sent this invitation. They said, I'm not going to tackle that. I'm sorry, Delta Sigma Theta. But my wife is a Delta. So my wife said, you are going to be speaking to Delta Sigma Theta.
You had no choice, right?
Anyway.
You had no choice.
I didn't have a choice, but I was going to be on here anyway. But you got to have the courage and you got to be bold. And the problem is that people right now are so fearful, right? And these tactics are making people fearful. This is why, superintendents, all across this country and school boards across this country are receiving threats, including me, right? Including me. But that is not going to stop me from speaking my truth, right? Those days are over where you can, bring out the hoses and bring out dogs and tell me to be quiet, right? Because even then they weren't stopping. We saw that on the news in the 60s. Well, we have arrived, Black and brown folks, right? And we all know we're not going back. So that ain't gonna happen. And what we have to start doing is standing our ground and speaking our truth, because nobody has the right to be comfortable, right? You have to lean into your discomfort, and that is when you grow most. And as long as we keep code switching and trying to change out what we want to do and all this other stuff, this is going to keep repeating itself. So let people accept us for who we are and be your authentic self every day. And that's what I advocate, and that's what I lead by in Alexandria City Public Schools.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your leadership on that. Well, one question that keeps coming up, and I'm seeing it often in the questions from our audience and others, is what can ordinary everyday people do to respond to the misinformation that's out there? And maybe we can go to you, Ms. Cook, and work our way around. I mean, is there anything practical folks can do, just, ordinary everyday citizens?
Well, this isn't necessarily everyday citizens, but it ties into what Dr. Hutchings was saying. I can tell you what school counselors are doing. And so I just want folks to know it's not the guidance counselors of old days who just sat around waiting for kiddos to come to their office. Today's school counselors are doing some of the very things Dr. Hutchings was talking in your schools, in your districts. They are looking at school and student data and disaggregating it to look for those gaps, the opportunity, the achievement, the attainment, the equity gaps, and then working with your school administrators to design programs to help all students be successful in school. So that's something new for our profession in the last 17 years, is that school counselors do use data to identify gaps. And one of the prime examples that comes up often is exactly what you said, looking at AP course enrollment and which students are enrolled in those courses. And I've heard time and time again is that often students of color are not in those courses for whatever reason. So then what does that mean for advocacy in your school, in your district? So for school counselors, for educators, looking at your school and district policies and really advocating for changes that aren't benefiting all students.
No, thank you so much for that, Ms. Dunn. I want to see if you had anything you wanted to add.
Sure. This is not a school only issue. This is not teacher only, schools only, principal only, superintendent only problem. This is the concern of the larger community. So we need to mobilize as a community. Practical steps could be first demystifying what this means. Connect the dots. It does happen. It has a lot to do with election, political power. It has a lot to do with our roles, the leadership, who's on your school board, who should be running for local local elected official, who should be a local elected official, who should be on your school board, who should represent the voices of your children. It has a lot to do with what parent groups look like. We see the mobs of parent groups are now using the actual school boards as their platform to voice and be very vocal. We need to see other parent groups and organize. So organize yourself, mobilize, not just parents, not just students, we need a larger community, we need everyone. Do teach-ins, do sit-ins, do voice-ins, do read-ins, take the books that are banned and read them. So where the school is not able to do it, you fill in the gaps for the school. Children shouldn't miss a beat because of the this political warfare that's happening right now, using them as the pawns in this fight. So I invite community, I invite everyone to join in and say, this is all of our problem. Not even a problem, our responsibility to make sure our children get what they need, to make sure that we are responsible about what education is and what it is not, and to stand beside leaders like Dr. Gregory Hutchings, who's doing their part, but can't do it alone. He has a community, he sits within a community, doesn't sit separate from the community. So those are some practical things we can do, and we're going to invite people to join us a lot, particularly in summer. Prepare and learn more and find out what it is, and don't just turn from it and say, oh, that's that school talk again, and know what it means for your children, but also other children as well.
Yeah, as we try to look around the corner to see what's coming, Dr. Gaffney, what would you suggest?
And that's one of the kind of challenges about this whole debate, right? It's really not about critical race theory on its merits. It's critical race theory being used as a proxy to challenge just the teaching of history, as we've kind of shared, as Dr. Hutchins has kind of pointed out. I think one of the best strategies just in the educational front and that sphere that we can focus on is going back to kind of old school tactics that have been used for decades and decades and centuries, in making sure that families that are invested in making sure that the experiences of students of color are present, right, in curriculum, are looking at the curriculum, are reading the history books that are coming home with their students and trying to identify the empirical gaps that begin to highlight the experiences of other groups, and making sure those voices are heard and those gaps are acknowledged and recognized. That's something that African Americans from the African American community that's been going on. This is what really kind of what drove the introduction of kind of Black studies into higher ed in the first place. Those kind of advocacy groups doing that type of work outside of the academia, kind of pushing it in. And same thing when it comes to the K through 12 system. So we really have to become partners in the learning experiences of our students and making sure those voices are represented and the empirical truth of these experiences represented in the curriculum.
No, Professor Jones, I'll give you the last word here.
Sure. The citizenry, all persons, whether stay-at-home parents, all the way through professionals up to the EDD and PhD level superintendents of school board, everybody should be engaging, and this sounds high, this sounds too hard, but it's not. Engaging as much as they can with primary sources to come to their own position, which is going to be nuanced. People are nuanced. But what we do now is you can turn on one network that claims critical race theory is being taught all over the kindergartens of the land, and you know the network. It's taught everywhere and it's throwing it out as a lie, and critical race theory's been propped up like the 10 Commandments are supposed to be. That's one network. Then the other network that some of us like is like, nope, not at all. It's not taught. It's not nope, CRT. If you're saying I like Candace Owens, so I'm rolling with that narrative, or I like Joy Reid, so everything should, you need to really just read this stuff. I don't mean read Kimberly Crenshaw, but I do mean read the source materials about what people are really for, who the scholars are, what they said, and try to engage that way, because there's so much noise. And I think the superintendent is correct to get off that Twitter, or at least have an attenuated relationship with Twitter, because there's just so much soundbite stuff. When you're talking about race, religion, identity, heritage, culture, Southern history, where we had to finally get rid of Jefferson Davis Highway after all these years, this is stuff that takes deep reflection, and the citizens are capable of that. I marvel at how our country went from segregated schools to desegregated schools in large parts of the South. Many places actually did do desegregation almost right away. In my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, my uncle volunteered, I never knew this till recently, in like 7th grade. He said, I'll go to the junior high and I'll go on the basketball team. And he went there, and there were no problems because he was a great basketball player. But the fact is, we did this. Like, people have the ability to reflect and follow the leaders, the thought leaders, the political leaders, the education leaders, and to do this thing right in community. And so my admonition would be to all of the citizens, you have the capacity to read the primary sources. That might even include the op-eds of the Point and Counterpoint, but just grapple with that and not the TV personalities in the first instance. You will come to your own understanding, and you'll find that even if you reject critical race theory as you understand it, it's not to be feared. It's probably to be appreciated. And that goes for those of us who consider ourselves to be more progressive too, on some other kinds of theories. So I stress the engagement, whether individually in the material or in community at the board meetings.
Thank you so much, Professor Jones, and thank you to my entire panel for your insight and for being here today. Let's give them all a virtual round of applause. So happy to engage in this conversation, and again, want to thank the organizers for inviting me to moderate the discussion. I now want to turn it back over to Jennifer Bishop of the Fairfax County chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. First of all, I have to reiterate that we are ecstatic with the turnout. Our purpose of having this session was to not only dispel myths, but also to provide a difference of perspectives so we can be better informed and we can make better decisions. And I think we've definitely achieved that today. So thank you for joining us. A couple of things I would be remiss if I didn't, again, thank our moderator and our panelists for their time, for their energy and their expertise. We really appreciate you, but I also want to thank the others who helped to make this session. And I would like to send special thank yous to Dr. Diane Reese again, because she was the vision behind this session and she helped move it forward. I'd also like to send a thank you to Sora Sully Washington, as well as Sora Andrea Wellington for their work, as well as Sora Janelle Brevard for her energy, her endless energy. I believe there's an announcement from the AACP. Ms. Camblin, would you like to share any last remarks about activities that your organization is going to be doing?
Why, yes, thank you so much. Hi, yes, I just wanted to extend an invitation to everyone we are having our general membership meeting starting at 7. We'll start a little bit late to give everybody an opportunity to switch over, but we're going to be continuing our conversation on education. And we're going to be discussing our local issues, as well as some of our advocacy efforts and legislation that has just recently been signed into law concerning literacy in schools. So I'm going to put the link in the chat and I hope everyone can join us, and we will start around 7:05. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, heartfelt thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you in some of our future social action activities. Have a safe and enjoyable evening. Bye-bye. So I will, while I think some people drop off, just again, wanted to thank you again. We're getting some feedback from attendees and they thought the session was outstanding. And quite honestly, I have to agree. And I love the fact that we had differences of perspectives and opinion, but I think it really gave people a clear indication that critical race theory was not something to be feared, but is something to be understood. And so again, I wanted to thank the panelists for your participation.